Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to talk about making change happen, strategies for inspiring sustainable practices. Cool Choices is doing this webinar today in conjunction with Wisconsin Green Muslims, so we're kind of delighted to have that collaboration. I'm Kathy Kuntz, the Executive Director of Cool Choices. Been involved in energy efficiency and sustainability for about 25 years, and I really love talking about what inspires behavior change. So I'm glad you can be with us today for this conversation. You know, this is an exciting time in sustainability. We're seeing all kinds of organizations and communities adopt really aggressive goals to reduce their emissions. You see cities across the U.S. and across the world committing to 100% clean energy. You see companies talking about reducing their emissions 50 and 80 and sometimes 100%. And all of that's super exciting. It's so exhilarating to see organizations make these commitments. Part of what happens when you make a commitment like that is that you need to start thinking about how you get everyone on board. A community can't achieve 100% clean energy if a third of the population is still wasting energy left and right. You know, you need aggressive goals mean everyone's on board, that everyone gets what you're doing and is working toward that common purpose. One of our past partners at Cool Choices put this really well. Talked about how it means an entire employee population moving in the same direction. Everyone understands the goal, they understand they have a role in the goal, and they're motivated to help achieve that goal. Ultimately, when we're talking about inspiring behavior change around sustainability, that's our quest. We're on a quest to create a culture where sustainable practices, where reducing waste, using less energy, are the new normal. And I think sometimes when we think about, oh, that's what we want to accomplish, presume that this is a problem of information. If we just tell people what we want them to do, they'll do it. If people are leaving the lights on, they must not know that lights use energy. If we tell them, they'll just turn them off. Sort of this kind of simple, like we just put up billboards saying everyone should emit less carbon, people will emit less carbon. Or maybe they won't. The reality is we're surrounded by information campaigns that aim to change our behavior with information. It's what nutritional labels, part of what they aim to do, the energy guide labels on appliances. And to think about how these things influence or don't influence you, you know, imagine that you and I are together in a room and I present you with two options. I've got a piece of chocolate cake and I've got a plate of raw broccoli. Now, if we presume this is all about information, in theory, if I tell you the broccoli has considerably more nutritional value than the chocolate cake, all of you will choose the broccoli, not the cake. Except that's not how it works, because our preferences, our choices aren't just based on information and analytical data. They're based on a whole bunch of other things. You know, when I think about the people I want to influence from a behavior change perspective and kind of where their heads are, this is my favorite image of that. Okay, when I'm thinking about who I want to influence, I think about these young men who are well aware that exercise is good for them, and that's why they're taking the escalator to the gym. Okay, we as human beings do all kinds of pretty irrational things. And it's not that we don't have, you know, they know exercise is good for them. Probably if somebody stopped them and pointed out, it's a little weird you're taking the escalator to the gym, they would agree and take the stairs. But typically, we're not making that kind of I'm going to stop and contemplate this decision before I make it. We're making hundreds of thousands of decisions all the time, and there's a ton going on in our head. You know, when we think about all the things that your brain is juggling every day. So you're thinking about your professional responsibilities, the report that's due next week, the stressful meeting you had with your boss last night, thinking about things in your personal life, the email you need to send to your sister, that Billy needs to be picked up from soccer at 4:15 and Amy needs to be at swim practice at 6:05 and you don't have a plan for dinner and the roof in the garage seems to be leaking. Okay, there's a billion things vying for attention in your head. And when we say, oh, and we also want you to be more mindful about how you're using resources and your recycling habits and it becomes a lot of additional noise. We have to be really strategic about how do we get people's attention and influence their choices effectively. And here at Cool Choices, we've been doing behavior change programs around sustainability since 2010. And we spent a lot of time looking at the behavior change literature and best practices from public health and other places to really understand, okay, if we want to influence people who are super busy, overloaded with information and stressors, how are we going to get their attention? What is it going to take to build that influence? And ultimately, we settled on a model where if we want to make change happen, we know we need to make it fun, social, and easy. We need to make it pleasant for you to change. We need to show you that other people are changing too. And we need to remove the friction associated with that change. Okay, fun, social, and easy. Now, in theory, that sounds really good. I will always remember exactly where I was the first time a social marketing expert stood in the front of a room and said to a group, me included, you need to make it fun, social, and easy. And I thought, holy cow, that sounds impossible. Because, when you think about sustainability, those aren't the first words you always think of. Think about some of the things we want people to do. Program their thermostat, insulate their attic. These are not the things that usually come with the term fun attached to them. Fun means in some ways pleasant. It feels good for me to do it. I feel proud of what I'm doing. I get some accolades. Something reflects them. Fun might be that there's a cool surprise embedded in it. And so we have to be really strategic about, so how are we going to make things fun? Now, fun is not impossible. I'm going to give you an example here. My favorite example of making things fun is the piano stairs example. Okay, so a terrific example of making things fun and getting more people to do them by making them fun. Think about how do you make the things you're doing fun? Okay, fun. First piece of this. Now, social can be equally challenging in reality. Because a lot of the things we want people to do, a lot of the practices we want people to do are not particularly public practices. At Cool Choices, we promote a myriad of practices, including turning off the water when you brush your teeth. Now, the picture in the middle comes from one of our participants who shared a picture of herself brushing her teeth with the water off. But for the most case, you don't know how the people around you, if they're running water when they're brushing their teeth, if they're leaving lights on in their house. You probably don't even know most of the time if they're leaving equipment on at their desks when they're not at their desks, because it's a little weird to lurk around other people's offices or cubicles to check out what the power supply thing is. But it's really important because as human beings, we take social cues from each other. So having a way to show people what other people are doing is really powerful. I want to give you a couple of examples of how powerful social cues are. Let me just jump to Okay, that's just a terrific kind of very modern day example of an experiment where of the power of peer pressure. I want to show you one more, a classic example of this, just because I think it's such a compelling one. This comes from the old TV series Candid Camera.
And you'll see how this man in the little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more. I will try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera stand. 3 of them, please. And this man has apparently been in group. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, he'll open the door, everybody's changed position. Now let's see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. There it is. Notice they take off their hats.
You definitely get the idea there. So that the point being that it's really very possible to influence what other people do through peer pressure. We heed social cues all the time. I think that last example in the Candid Camera video is really instructive because the guy with the hat is a younger man. He's clearly looking at the others for cues. Think about all the ways we take social cues from each other. When we want people to adopt sustainable practices, the more we can make those practices visible so that they can see cues in the people around them, the more quickly you can move the majority, and then it really becomes very simple because everyone can see the cues. So that's the social piece of this. The last piece, remember, fun, social, easy. So this is the carbon footprint of a typical U.S. household. And it looks anything but easy, like all kinds of pieces of things. There's when I look at this, I think about all the competing priorities and where does someone start and how do you make sense of this? And, you know, part of what we do at Cool Choices is we try to make that really simple for people by giving them really concrete steps. Carpool today. Turn off the water when you brush your teeth. Simple things you can do that make an incremental difference. So trying to take that thing that's sometimes complicated and make it really simple. Making things simple, though, is also about removing, I said before, removing friction. So making it easier to do the right thing. And sometimes we make it really hard to do the right thing. So if you're at this field and you have something that should be recycled, what do? Kind of only one choice here, and it's to throw it in the trash. And so thinking about, you know, part of easy is our obligation as advocates to think about how are we making it really simple for people to do the right thing. Too often, I think we sort of develop this sense that, well, if people really cared, they would do it even if it's hard. And that's just nonsense. Okay, remember the guys on the escalator. Okay, all the things going on in people's heads. If you make it hard, they're not going to do it. So really, part of your quest as an advocate is to always go, how do we make it easy for people to do the right thing? And tied to this is how do we make the right thing the default? Defaults are really powerful. Let me give you a very concrete example of this around organ donation. So there are two ways you can solicit organ donation when people are signing up for driver's licenses or other IDs. You can ask people to opt in. Will you be a donor? Or you can ask people to opt out. Do you prefer not to be a donor? So here's a very real example. In Germany, which is the bluish model on the left, it's an opt-in, much like it is in the U.S. Okay, people check the box if they want to donate an organ. In Austria, in the orange, it's an opt-out. So they check the box if they do not want to donate. Germany and Austria, countries in Europe, share a language, share a cultural history, very similar in all kinds of ways. Except when you look at organ donation rates, 12% in Germany and 99% in Austria. Because if you make the right choice a default, people will mostly follow it. What this mostly tells us is that about 80% of the population doesn't really even want to think about organ donation. Whatever the default is, whatever the default, which tends to be a signal that everyone else is doing this, whatever that is good enough for me. So think about, how do you make it a default for people to do the right thing? How do you give people new computers that are already set up to go to sleep after 10 minutes? Do you make it easy for them to default into the right place instead of expecting that they'll do those things over time? So we're thinking about this default thing. The other side of that to really pay attention to is to make sure you're not reinforcing bad practices. So very often in the environmental movement, we have a tendency to talk about how terrible things are, thinking that's going to motivate people to do something. So we show pictures of all the plastic water bottles that aren't recycled, or we talk about this terrible amount of pollution here, thinking that's going to mobilize people. But remember, we're humans and we take social cues. So when you tell me that 9 out of 10 plastic water bottles are not recycled, I'm a human being and I hear that mostly people don't recycle bottles. It's mostly not a big deal if I don't recycle this bottle. You tell me everyone leaves the lights on, not a really big deal if I leave the lights on. So a really critical piece of this is to be very deliberate and stop reinforcing the negative. There's a behavior you don't want to have happen, stop telling everyone it's the norm. And instead, I want you to showcase the people who are doing the right thing. And let me give you a really concrete example of this that involves one of my favorite things, chocolate. So for a while, it seemed like everywhere I went, I would meet someone who had the same challenge. Everyone was struggling with people leave desk lamps and computers on all night in our organization. Okay, you walk through the building late at night and there are all these computer monitors, bright, and desk lamps, and there's no one around, and it's just a huge waste. And we've been sending emails saying everyone's doing this and nothing's happening. I'm like, don't send any more emails. Clearly it's not working. You should stop doing that. Instead, my recommendation is to buy a bag of chocolate. Buy a bag of chocolate and come into work early one morning and walk through the halls. Everywhere you see a desk where the lights are off, the computers are off, leave a chocolate on the keyboard. No note, nothing, just chocolate on keyboards where things are off, no chocolate where things are on. People will come in, there'll be some discussion, I have chocolate, you don't have chocolate. You know, there'll be a little buzz and maybe about, 9:30, 10 o'clock, send out an email to everybody, just, props to the folks who remembered last night to turn off things at their workstations. I left them a small thank you this morning. We really appreciate your effort. Okay, you're telling everyone then, these people got recognition because they did a good thing. I largely guarantee you that very night, twice as many computers and desktop lamps will be off because there might be chocolate. Now, it's really important as the random rewarder that you not leave chocolate 2 nights in a row. You're not paying people to turn off these things. You're randomly rewarding them. So think, about, you could easily do this once a week. You could probably do it once a month, and it still will resonate because what you're doing is you're spontaneously giving recognition, you're creating some buzz around that, and you're making people feel good about doing the right thing. Fundamental to that example is this kind of idea of what happens when you do positive reinforcement. So when you recognize somebody, you recognize Tom because he's doing a great job recycling. Okay, 2 things happen when you recognize Tom. The sort of impact of that is dual. First, Alice sees you recognize Tom, and she thinks, well, I'm recycling too. I better make sure I do more of it so they see me. But at the same time, Tom has now been held up as someone who recycles. And as humans, we have a pretty strong need to be consistent, to be viewed by our peers as doing things in a consistent way. So if I call out Tom as a great recycler, he's going to be a super great recycler going forward because he doesn't want someone else to see him mess up and go, you didn't even deserve it when Kathy called you out. Okay, so Tom is set to be a better recycler, and now Alice is fired up to get recognition too. Which of course means I get to recognize Alice, which prompts yet more people to get fired up for recognition, while Tom and Alice are still feeling the need to be consistent with that. So you create this virtuous circle by recognizing what people are doing right and celebrating that so that other people want to be part of the celebration. Really fundamental to, and doing that is fun, social, and easy. All of those things wrapped together. I want to give you just a couple more examples that apply to faith-based organizations, that apply to communities, that apply to businesses, to kind of give you a bit more application of some of the stuff we're talking about. And the first is around transportation. So if we want more people to be biking in our community, one of the ways to help accelerate that is to showcase who's already biking, to feature prominent people, opinion leaders of whatever form. That might be the boss, but it might also be the administrative assistant who knows everything about everything in the organization. Okay? Showcasing their efforts can inspire others. Again, what you're doing there in part is making things visible. You're showing that these influencers are doing this, giving other people a social cue. Around some parts of what we're promoting, visibility is hard. You know, you can't typically walk by office buildings and tell which of them is more energy efficient than the other. But there are tools like the Energy Star Portfolio Manager that do exactly that for you, that enable you to see how your building compares to another building, that benchmarks you against another building, and lets you see how your building using energy compared to another building. This is really important because it's that visibility piece. So if I understand that my building uses more energy than your building, I can do something about that. When I have the information in that case, I'm more motivated because I can see that there's this comparison and I'm not comparing as well as you. There definitely is a place where that information and making that information more visible can be really powerful. Another example of kind of visible information around water usage. This is my house's water usage. I'm super lucky. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and our local water utility provides data to me on an hourly basis, actually, about my water consumption. So I can look at this data and I can think about what's going on in my household, and I can pinpoint behaviors and pieces of equipment that are using a lot of water and address those things because I've got better information. I don't just have here's your water usage over 6 months. I know, oh, my water usage seems to spike on the days that we do this or we do that. Actually, I should use a much older picture of this graph because earlier it was how I discovered that we had a really inefficient dishwasher and we're able to replace it and see our water usage come down dramatically. The other thing they do as part of this system is they'll send me an alert when my water usage on a particular day is over a level. So they give me information that helps me make good decisions. They send me an email that says, you used more water yesterday than you intended to. And I can figure out, oh, is something going wrong? Is there a leak? What's happening? Another piece of this, so kind of as a final thing to think about, when we're giving people kind of helpful suggestions, sort of two kind of extremes in this. You can give people 3 tips, or you could give people 100 tips. And the reality is it's much more powerful to give them 3. Now, I know we're sustainability advocates and we have a million ideas and 456 ways people could reduce the energy usage in their home, and I want to share them all right now. The trouble is there's really clear data that people are kind of easily information overloaded, that if you give me 100 suggestions, most likely I'm going to do 0. If you give me 3, I might well do 1. And so because our quest is effectiveness, it's much simpler to think about 3 things and figure out which one applies to me and how I could do it than to sort through a list of 100 where maybe 25 of them don't even apply to me. So always, always, always be thinking about simple. How do we reduce the friction? How do we make it easier for people to do the right thing? And part of that is not overloading them with information. That said, apparently I'm going to overload you with a little information. I'm not. I'm going to just give you kind of as part of the closing here, want to just mention resources if you're interested in delving further into sort of how to influence behaviors, these are some resources I would recommend. So the kind of a variety of things that are pretty readable and a lot of really good examples and some interesting insights about how we get people to adopt sustainable practices. So those I would recommend as resources to you if you want to dig deeper. And then I'm just going to open it up for questions. They're on the sidebar of the GoToWebinar thing. You can pop that open here, sorry, to be able to have a place where you can type a question if you've got a question. Oh, and so there's how else can we make things social? Can you give us any other examples? So one of the examples I maybe alluded to briefly earlier that strikes me I could reinforce is using photographs. So in our program, we lots of times offer people points for submitting photos of them doing sustainable things. It's how we got photos of people turning off the water when they brush their teeth, and people are interested in photos of other people in their community. Again, when I send in a photo, I'm creating that opportunity for me to feel the pressure to be consistent with the behavior I'm portraying in the photo, but being able to show a bunch of photos of people in your community who are biking to work or who are saving energy at home can be really powerful. It's that social proof folks need to do more. I think the other way certainly that we use social is we tend to aggregate results. So instead of talking about what one action you take is going to save, we always talk about what the savings will be across the community when everyone does this. So trying to give people that sense of group efficacy around that is an important thing, I think. With that, I am not seeing more questions, so I think we will call it a day. Thanks so much for participating in today's webinar. If you've got other questions, feel free to reach out to me. And thanks for all you're doing to promote sustainability. Have a great rest of your day.